that we begin. Bruchim Habaim, to those who came on time. I'm sure that more will join us. I'm broadcasting live from Florida, where I've been in the States for 2 weeks fundraising for Schechter. And after this class, I go back to Israel, God willing. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome Josh Schumann, our new media person. He's on my screen, he's right below me. And he brings to us vast experience in the areas of new media. He's an active member of Kilat Mayanot in Jerusalem. As Josh, Baruch haba.
Todah, thank you, David.
And we have already put in the chat an advertisement for our adult ed, which goes on during the year, run by Dr. Edka Leibowitz.
You can see this at the top.
Okay, and both, we have courses both in Hebrew and in English, and some of the English courses are done at an hour when anyone in the United States can participate, even on the West Coast, but primarily on the East and Middle Coasts. In other words, the teacher is teaching at 5 or 6 or 7 p.m. Israel time so that people from the States can participate. Josh has made that schedule available so that people can join those courses, sign up and join those courses. So our topics today, not surprisingly, have to do with the Yamim Noraim, with the high holidays. I'll be talking about Slichot, followed by Rabbi Ron Becker from the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary, Rabbi Ari Chassid from the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary, and Dr. Shula Lederman from the Schechter Institute Graduate School. All the topics are interesting, they're very different, and we hope that this will enrich your high holiday experience. My topic, and now I'm going to try and share screen. We hope that works always. My topic is, when should Slichot be recited? And after we cover that, we're going to talk about the structure of what is in the Slinghold Service. This is a responsum I published through the Schechter website back in 2006. It was the first of my Response in a Moment email columns, and you can find it on the Schechter website under articles under my name. Interestingly enough, we Ashkenazim think that everybody in the Jewish world begins Slichot Saturday night, last night, the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, or the Saturday night before the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah. We will soon see that that is not the case. And in this responsum, I bring 7 different customs as to when we recite Slichot at this time of year. And the first 3 are in general use until today. The last 4 are not well known or not known at all today. And I'm going to, in my responsum, I obviously quote or summarize the sources in the English. I'm going to also quote the sources in Hebrew as I go along. The Slinghold Service is not mentioned in the Talmud. It appears in the Gaonic period, and I'm not going to talk about the contents because I'll talk about that at the end. Let's first talk about when we recite Slinghold. So the earliest and most original custom for reciting Slinghold is the custom of a number of the Geonim, including Rav Kohen Tzedek in the 9th century, Rav Amram Gaon in the 9th century, Rav Hai Gaon in the 10th century, leading on to Maimonides in North Africa, already after the period of the Geonim. And they say that the time for reciting Slichot is only during Aseret Yemei Tshuva, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. And thus, for example, in the Hebrew, Amar Rav Kohen Tzedek, Minhag B'shtei Yeshivot, there's a custom in 2 yeshivot, that's Surah and Pumbedita, Lomar Tachanunim, to recite supplications, Ba'asara Yamim Sheben Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim, in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Mashkimim B'cho Yom Levet HaKnesset, Lifnei Amud HaShachar. We wake up early every morning at the synagogue before the sun rises, and we ask God for forgiveness, etc., etc., etc. Excuse me. So that is the earliest mention of this custom, and they say that it's based on a passage in the Talmud, Rosh Hashanah, folio 18a. The verse in Isaiah says, Dirshu Hashem bihimatzo, seek God when he is found. And the Midrash says, these are the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In other words, the time to find God, or the most convenient time to find God, is in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that's the original custom. And interestingly enough, this custom continued into the time of Rab Nisim Gerondi in the 14th century in Spain. And in his commentary on the Reef to Masechet Rosh Hashanah, he says that this was still the custom in Girona Usvivoteha, in Girona and its environs in the 14th century. But today, people no longer only recite Slichot during the 10 days of penitence. The second standard custom, which was very widespread, is from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur, which is about 40 days. And we live in Jerusalem in Talpiot, opposite two synagogues, one Ashkenazic and one Sephardic. And my wife and I do not need to go very far in order to hear Slichot every morning at 5 a.m. during the month of Elul. We can listen to Slichot from our window, and they also blow the shofar during the Slichot. So especially during COVID, when they were davening outside, we had a live rendition of Slichot during the entire month of Elul. And the earliest source for this custom, again, I'm going to read from the Hebrew. Matzinu tshuva l'Rabbeinu Hai. We found a tshuva, a responsum of Rav Hai Gaon, who died in the year 1038, 1,000 years ago. Uminagenu lomar tachanunim behane asara yamim lechud. That our custom is to recite the Slichot only for the 10 days. Vishamanu, but we heard demimitzat mekomot beparas. We heard in certain places in Persia, which of course is Iran today, kaime me Rosh Chodesh Elul. They get up from Rosh Chodesh Elul. And as Rav Hai Gaon, who is telling you that the custom of the two yeshivot in Bavel is the 10 days of penitence, says, but we have heard that there are places in Persia where they begin Slichot on Rosh Chodesh Elul. And the explanation that Rav Hai gives for this, as I quoted here, and we have heard that in some places in Persia, etc., and they say that on that day Moses went up the mountain a third time and came down with the second set of tablets on Yom Kippur. In other words, he went up on Rosh Chodesh Elul to receive the second set of tablets, which he brought down on Yom Kippur, according to the Midrash. And whoever adds additional prayers of mercy and supplication, Arei ze meshubach, it is to his merit. And this is what Rav Hai Gaon quotes in the names of the Jews of Persia. And Rabbi Yitzchak ibn Giyat in Spain in the 11th century says, and our custom is like those who arise from the beginning of Elul. In other words, the Persian custom was adopted by Spanish Jewry, and most of Edot HaMizrach, most of the Jews of Mediterranean lands and Yemenite Jews begin reciting Slichot beginning on Rosh Chodesh Elul until today. And finally, we arrive at the Ashkenazic custom, which is a little bit convoluted, but as we know, Ashkenazim are a little bit convoluted. And it takes a bit of explaining to explain why we recite Slichot beginning on the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, or this year on the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah. And this custom is first mentioned by Rabbi Simcha of Vitry, Rashi's pupil, in the famous Machzor Vitry. The parallel version is also called Siddur Rashi. This was a Siddur written by Rashi's pupil around the year 1120 in France. And he simply says what the custom is, but he doesn't explain it. The custom was explained by the Mordechai around the year 1300. And it was almost 200 years later. And the Mordechai there is talking about a custom which no longer exists. Many Jews used to fast not only on Yom Kippur, they also used to fast on Rosh Hashanah. And this is a custom that has disappeared. And Professor Yitzchak Gilad of Bar Ilan University published a very detailed article about this custom about 30 years ago in the journal called Tarbitz. Clearly, it is forbidden to fast on Rosh Hashanah. And nonetheless, many Jews fasted on Rosh Hashanah. So the Mordechai who is saying you're not supposed to fast on Rosh Hashanah is saying, well, we have a dilemma. We're supposed to recite Slichot for 10 days, and Slinghold are somehow connected with fasting, but we can't fast on Rosh Hashanah, so we need to add days before Rosh Hashanah. So this is what he wrote. The Ashkenazim are accustomed to fast during the 10 days of penitence, but it's forbidden to fast on the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, Shabbat Shuvah, and Yom Kippur Eve. And on Yom Kippur Eve, you're actually required to eat a lot. In order to complete the 10 days of fasting, which were accompanied by Slichot, the Ashkenazim decided to fast and recite Slichot for 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. So, when Rosh Hashanah fell on Tuesday or Wednesday, they started Slichot on Saturday night, a week before Rosh Hashanah. Okay? And therefore, in certain years, let's say that Rosh Hashanah falls on a Tuesday or Wednesday, so we start Slichot on Saturday night. But if, as this year, Rosh Hashanah starts on a Sunday night, you can't make up the 4 days, and therefore you start on the Saturday night before the Saturday night, before Rosh Hashanah. And in the Hebrew, it sounds just as convoluted. The Mordechai writes, "Ve'od lefichach tiknu chachamim litanot 4 yamim lifnei Rosh Hashanah, keneged 4 yamim miRosh Hashanah liyom Kippur she'ochlim bahem, shnei yamim sheRosh Hashanah v'Shabbat beintaim ve'erev Yom Kippur." And he uses the phrase lifnei lifanim, right? Before. So this is the explanation of the Ashkenazic custom today. And now we transition to 4 customs that most Jews today have never heard of. But I love finding customs that most Jews today have never heard of. Number 4 is that we begin Slichot on the 15th day of Elul until Yom Kippur. And this is mentioned in one of the editions of Seder of Amram Gaon. However, it is not found in the standard edition of Seder of Amram Gaon. It is mentioned by Rabbi David Abu Draham or Abu Daham, who lived in Spain around the year 1340. And the explanation given for this is not very convincing. It says there that it says in the tractate of Rosh Hashanah that God judges the Jewish people before he judges the Gentiles. Milamed Yisrael nichnasim tchila ladin, that the Jews are first brought into judgment. And since Rosh Hashanah is Yom Adin, therefore we are starting our supplications early, and the early is on the 15th day of Elul. So he doesn't really explain why it's specifically the 15th day of Elul, but he explains why it's before Rosh Hashanah. Another even more interesting custom is to begin Slichot on the 25th day of Elul until Yom Kippur. So you may say, why the 25th day of Elul? And again, it's a rather involved explanation of the same Rav Nisim Gerundi that I mentioned before, who lived in Spain in the 13th century. And he says that this is the custom of Barcelona and its environs. Barcelona was a very important Jewish community in the medieval period. That, for example, is where the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, was the rabbi for many years. And the reason given is that there's a midrash in Schechter de Rav Kahana, which says that the world was created on the 25th of Elul, while Adam was created on Rosh Hashanah. In other words, we view Rosh Hashanah as the day of creation. That's the standard Jewish interpretation. But this midrash says that the world was actually created on the 25th of Elul, and Adam was created on the 6th day, which is Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, we don't begin to recite Slichot on the 6th day on Rosh Hashanah. We begin to recite Slichot on the 25th day of Elul, which is the day of creation. In other words, following that midrash, they changed the custom as to when we recite Slichot. The Italian custom was to recite Slichot from the Monday or Thursday before Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. In other words, again, adding a few days, but not for the same reason as the Ashkenazim. And this is first mentioned by 2 books, which I call the Babzi twins, Shibolei Aleket and Tanya Rabati. These are 2 parallel works written in Italy in the 13th century. And Tanya Rabati seems to be an abbreviation of Shibolei Aleket. And it's also found in Machzor B'nai Roma, the Machzor, the Sidur of the Jews of Rome. And this is because Monday and Thursday were traditionally observed as fast days. So therefore, they made a connection between fasting and Slichot and fasting on Monday and Thursday, which they did in any case. And then again, you get into the complicated mathematics. In other words, if Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat or Monday, they began to recite Slichot on the Monday before. But if it fell on Thursday, they began on the Thursday before. If it fell on Tuesday, they began on Monday, 8 days before. That is simply a summary of what Shibolei HaLeket is. And finally, we have a custom mentioned by the Meiri, a very famous rabbi in Provence, around the year 1300. Most of his volumes of commentary on the Talmud were only published in the 20th century from manuscript. And he has an entire book called Chibur HaTshuva, an entire work devoted to the laws and customs of tshuva, of repentance, and also the philosophy of tshuva. And he says there is a custom to recite Slichot every Monday and Thursday of Elul, and then continue during Aseret Yemei Tshuva until Yom Kippur. He does not cite a specific reason for the custom, other than the Midrash that we should supplicate God for forgiveness on Erev Rosh Hashanah. So in total, these are the 7 customs I have found regarding when we recite Slichot. The 2 customs that have survived until today are the Ashkenazic custom of starting the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, or the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, and the Sephardic custom, which my wife and I hear every morning, of reciting Slichot during the month of Elul. And as I conclude this responsum, all of these customs are legitimate, and the usual Talmudic attitude towards customs is nara ufashtei. Every river follows its own course. In other words, these are all legitimate customs, but the main thing is that the Slichot should give us an impetus to ask forgiveness from God before Rosh Hashanah. Now I'm going to skip the notes in the bibliography, and I want to talk about what is in the Slichot. And in order to understand the structure of Slichot, we need to look at one Talmudic passage, which I will try to share. It says here, new share. And this is Rosh Hashanah folio 17b. And I thank my brother, Cantor Abe Galinkin. I was at his house last week, and I took a photograph of this page of Talmud. I don't like using databases. I like using the actual page of Talmud. And this is a very, very famous passage in Rosh Hashanah folio 17b. And this little passage is the entire basis for the Slinghold service. So let's see what it says. Let me see if I can make it bigger. There we go. Can you see it in Hebrew, Josh? Okay. We're starting here on about the 8th line of the page in the Talmud. It says, Vayavor Hashem al panav vayikra, the famous verse introducing the 13 attributes of God. And God, it's literally translated, it would be, and God passed before his face and he cried out. That's the verse. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, an Amorah in Eretz Yisrael who died in the year 279. Il malay mikra katuv efshar lo omro. If the verse had not said it, we could not say it. In other words, this is a very anthropomorphic verse. This makes it sound like God has a face. So what does this anthropomorphic verse mean? Shenitatef HaKadosh Baruch Hu k'shliach tzibur. And I love it. First, he tells you it's very anthropomorphic, and then Rabbi Yochanan adds to the anthropomorphism, and he says this teaches us that God wrapped himself in a talis like the shliach tzibur, like the cantor, v'hera lo leMoshe seder tefillah, and he showed Moshe Rabbeinu the order of the service. Amar lo, he says to Moses, Kol zman sheYisrael chotin ya'asu lefanai kaseder hazeh. Whenever the Jewish people sins, they should do before me this order of service, Va'ani mochel lahem, and I will forgive them. What is this order of service? It's the 13 attributes of God. Adoshem, Adoshem, Erachum, V'chanun. We all know the various tunes. And then Rav Yehuda, who lives in Bavel at the same time, 2nd generation Amorah, 3rd century, Rav Yehuda adds, Brit kruta l'shloshes midot. A covenant is made through the 13 attributes of God, she'enan chozrot rekam, that they are not returned empty. In other words, God will not turn away from the 13 attributes of God. Shene'emar, Hine Anochi Kored Brit. That in those verses talking about the 13 attributes of God, God says, and here I will cut a covenant. In other words, both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehuda in the same generation, one in Eretz Yisrael and one in Bavel, are telling us, I will share screen again. They are telling us that the 13 attributes are an almost guaranteed method of God forgiving us. That if we recite Hashem, Hashem, El Rachum V'Chanun, then God will forgive us our sins. This is the reason that this verse or these verses are repeated so many times during the high holidays, and especially during the Slinghold service. So if we look at the Slinghold service, which as we said began in the days of the Geonim in Bavel in the 9th century, and this is simply, I sat last night and went through the Slinghold for the first night, which we recited last night, and this is the structure of the Slinghold service. We begin with the Ashrei, a prayer we all know throughout the year, one of the Psalms from the book of Psalms, which is normally recited 3 times every day. We begin the Slinghold service with Ashrei, followed by Chatzi Kaddish, the so-called half Kaddish. And then there is a string of biblical verses, and scholars such as Rabbi Chaim Kival and Rabbi Max Artz and others say that this was the earliest part of the Slinghold service. In other words, before they made up all the beautiful piyutim poems we're going to mention in a minute, before they had piyutim, they had verses from the Bible. So if you open up the Slinghold booklet, right after Chatzi Kaddish, it says, Shomea Tfilah Adecha Kol Basar Yavo. There's an entire page and a half of biblical verses. This was apparently the earliest part of the Slinghold service. Then there is a piyut, a poem called Ech Niftach Peh. How shall we open up our mouths? The technical term is pticha. Pticha means to open. It's an alphabetic acrostic of the Aleph Bet. Ech, Be'elu, Ga'alnu, Davaknu, Aleph Bet Gimel Dalid. And what does the pticha lead into? It leads into El Erech HaPayim, the introductory paragraph of the 13 attributes of God. And the introductory paragraph says that God, you have commanded us to repent. You should forgive us for our sins, just as when Moses stood before you, and Vayikra b'Shem Adonai, as he called out in the name of God, and there it says, and now it quotes the verse, Vayavor Hashem al panav vayikra, and God went before his face and he said, Ad Hashem erachum v'chanun. So you see that the structure of Slinghold, each time the center of each section is an introduction followed by the 13 attributes of God, and then a few verses such as Slachna, forgive us, Vayomer Hashem salachti kitvarecha, and God said, I have forgiven as you have requested. Then we get to another piyut, and the technical term is a slicha, which is not surprising. The piyutim about slichot are called slicha, forgive us. And again, it's an acrostic. The one on the first night is Ein mi yikra b'tzedek. Once again, we're amazed at the abilities of the paitan of the poet. It's a double alphabetic acrostic. For each letter of the Aleph Bet, there are 2 verses. Ein mi yikra b'tzedek, ish tov nimshal kechedek, Aleph Aleph, Bet, bakesh rachamim, bishum panim, gimel gimel, etc., etc. And once again, after the introduction of the Slicha poem, we have El Melech Yoshev, which is another type of introduction to the 13 attributes of God, followed by Hashem, Hashem, El Rachum V'Chanun, the 13 attributes of God. If we recite this verse, God will forgive us, according to the Talmudic passage. Then we have the third piyut. The third piyut is also called a Slicha, asking God for forgiveness. And it's Tavo Lefanecha Shabbat Chinun. You'll notice that it doesn't start with the Aleph, it starts with the letter Taf. And medieval Jewish poets like to make their lives difficult. Not only did they do alphabetic acrostics, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalid, they also did Tashrak, Taf, Shin, Resh, Kuf, through the Aleph, Bet backwards. So they go from Taf to Shin to Resh to Kuf to Tzadik to Pei. And in a beautiful fashion, once again, the Slicha talks about that God should forgive us. And then we have this centerpiece of the Slinghold service, which is the Pismon. Pismon means a hymn with a refrain. And we all know this Pismon. It starts out, B'motzai menucha, B'motzai menucha. That's the introduction. And then there are all sorts of tunes for the refrain. Lishmoa, Lishmoa, Lishmoa el arina, Lishmoa el arina, ve'el tefila. That was either written or sung by Cantor Yossela Rosenblatt. And after that, Pismon talks again about the themes of God forgiving us in the middle of the night during Slinghold, that he should listen to the Rina and the Tfilah, to the prayer and the prayer. And once again, followed by El Melech Yoshev, the introduction, and Hashem Hashem. And then we have another chain of biblical verses, climaxed by Shema Kolenu. And at that time, we open the ark. Shema Kolenu Hashem Elokeinu Chus Rachem Aleinu. Hear our voices, O God. Have mercy upon us. Kabel barachamimu v'ratzon et tfilatenu. Accept with mercy our prayers. 4 famous verses from the Bible, asking God to forgive us. And then we arrive at the other feature of the Slichot, which is repeated many, many times on Yom Kippur, and that is the Vidui, the confession of sins. I have also published a responsive about that, which you can read on the Schechter Institute website. And the Vidui in the Talmudic period was very short and very simple. It says in the tractate of Yoma that if you recite the words Aval Anachnu Chatanu, but we have sinned, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of the confession of sins. If only the Jewish people would have followed that advice. The Vidui of Hashamnu has 1 Vidui for each letter of the alphabet. The Alchet has 2 Viduis for each letter of the alphabet, and so on and so forth. So we repeat the Hashamnu 3 times in the Slinghold service. Then we have Anenu Hashem Anenu, hear us, O God, hear us, or answer us, O God, answer us. Mishana Lavram Avinu, he who answered Abraham, our forefather, listen to us. We ask God to listen to us for the sake of our forefathers. And then we have a number of paragraphs in Aramaic. And to us, these paragraphs seem very esoteric. But we have to remember that in the 9th century, when Slinghold began, the lingua franca of the Jewish people was Aramaic. They were written in Aramaic so that every single Jew, even the most ignorant Jew, should understand the prayer. And I sing this every year with a beautiful tune, which is Chabad Nigun. O merciful one, who answers the poor in spirit, Anena, answer us. A beautiful prayer in Aramaic, followed by the Tachanun, which we recite throughout the year. Once again, the Tachanun is followed by 2 prayers in Aramaic, which were meant for the people reciting those prayers in the 9th century. Then we sing the famous song Shomer Yisrael, which is the end of Tachanun, and we end the Slichot with Kaddish Shalem. So we see here, in a nutshell, this is the structure of the Slinghold service. The centerpiece of the Slinghold service is the Hashem Hashem, the 13 attributes of God, based on that passage in Rosh Hashanah, folio 17b. We saw that there are 7 different customs as to when we begin Slinghold. We saw the structure of the Slinghold service based on the 13 attributes of God. And now all I can say is now the simple part. Now we actually have to ask forgiveness from God and from our fellow human beings. So I will begin by asking any of you forgiveness if I have sinned against you during the past year. And that's what we must do until Yom Kippur, because as it says in the Mishnah in Yoma, Yom Kippur atones for the sins between man and God. It does not atone for the sins between one person and another until we ask forgiveness from each other. So on this note, we segue into our second shiur, our second lecture with Rabbi Chaya Rowan Becker. I wish all of you a Shana Tova U'Metuka, a sweet and happy year. And I'm sorry, but I have to go to the airport to fly back to Israel. So Shana Tova, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
David, thank you very much. Toda
Toda
rabba.
rabba, Josh, and all of you. Toda.
Okay. Michal?
Yeah, thank you, David. And we look forward to seeing you back in Israel very, very soon. And now, Chaya.
Thank you. So I'll thank Rabbi Professor Glinken for doing exactly what I needed for as an introduction to what I wanted to talk about, because he making the point that the center around which the Seder Slichot revolves is the Hashem Hashem El Rachum V'Chanun, is what I want to discuss a little bit today, the themes or the models of forgiveness, or of asking for forgiveness and receiving forgiveness that we have in the High Holiday liturgy, and specifically in the Slichot, which we recite these days, and also on Yom Kippur. So I'm going to share my screen, just one second. So here we see this is from Yom Kippur evening tefillah, but we say this over and over and over again, as we know, beginning with El Melech Yoshev al Kisei Rachamim, as kind of an introduction. Please God, sitting on your merciful throne. We know that you are, you're the judge of all, and so on. And please act towards us the way that you acted with Moshe. Keodata le'anav mikedem, the Anav, the famous modest one, meaning Moshe. Vayered Hashem be'anan, vayityatzeh imosam, vayikra b'shem Hashem. This is quoting from Shmot, chapter 34, with the scene of what happens after Chet HaEgel, after the sin of the golden calf. And what our liturgy does in this specific passage, this and some passages around it, and specifically in saying what Rabbi Glinken read from Masechet Rosh Hashanah, saying this is the essence of Slichot. This is the center of Slichot. By saying that, it's creating a kind of a very, very interesting salad in our heads, or it's maybe supposed to be creating a very interesting salad in our heads about what it means to ask for forgiveness and what it means to get forgiveness, to receive forgiveness. Because the Hashem Hashem El Rachum V'Chanun appears twice in the Torah, once in regard with Chet HaEgel, with the sin of the golden calf, and the other time with regard to Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies. Except there are some differences, some very, very, very significant differences, which I want to try to point out today. So when we chant this centerpiece of Slichot, we mostly quote from the golden calf story. Okay, all of these verses, Vayered Hashem be'anan, vayityatzeh imosam, ve'avo Hashem al panav vayikra, Hashem Hashem el rachum v'chanun, v'salachta la'avonenu l'chatatenu l'chaltanu, are verses from that passage. The ending of this centerpiece goes to the other story. Slach na la'avon ha'am hazeh kegodel chasdecha, וכאשר נסעת לעם הזה ממצרים עד הנה ושם נאמר, ויאמר השם, סלחתי כדבריך. We all say, and God said, I have forgiven as you have said. You, Moshe, have said. So the liturgy ties together these two stories, but let's take a look at these two stories separately and see what kinds of different stories they tell about forgiving and asking for forgiveness and receiving forgiveness. So in Shmot, in Numbers, in the story of the golden calf, Moshe, these are the verses we just read, okay? Moshe comes down. These verses that we just said are already the end of the story. It's not when Moshe asks for forgiveness from God. It's already after Moshe received God's promise of forgiveness. Moshe see the story goes like this. The story is that Moshe is on Har Sinai, right? And then here I'm in Shmot 32, 2 chapters back. Moshe is on Har Sinai, and then God says to Moshe, Moshe, look, your people, right? Your people, which you have brought from Mitzrayim, have sinned. God spoke to Moses, hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely. Shichet amcha, okay? Have done something terrible, and they've made this golden calf, and now I'm going to destroy them. This is all happening while Moshe is on Har Sinai for the first time. And then Moshe begs God's forgiveness. Veichal Moshe et pnei Hashem Elohav. But Moses implored God, saying, don't let your anger blaze forth against your people, whom you have taken out of Egypt. And then he gives the reason. Why should you not destroy the people? The Egyptians will say he couldn't manage to bring them to Eretz Israel, okay? Shuv mecharon apecha, so you should stop being angry. You should turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. And then Moshe goes on and says, and also remember that you promised Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Israel, you promised them that you would make them into a large nation and you would bring your nation to the land of Israel. And then God does something very interesting and unique, and he vayinachem al hara'a asher diber la'asot lamo. God renounced the punishment. I don't know if renounce is the best translation here. Vayinachem is a very special verb in Hebrew. It's the shorish, the root nun chet mem nacham, which is nechama, right? Comfort, and also nichem is to change your mind. Vayinachem al hara'a asher diber la'asot lamo. Also vayinachem God about destroying the world in the story of Noach, and so nacham is a profound change of heart. Profound change of heart, which sometimes means changing your mind, and sometimes means finding comfort and relinquishing grief. So it's a very, very profound change. So God decides not to do this bad to his people, and then Moshe goes down. Okay, we're in chapter 32 now. Moshe goes down in chapter 33 and is angry and breaks the luchot, the tablets, and rebukes the people, and then says, you know what, I'm going to go up and I'm going to pray for you. I hope God forgives you. And then he goes up and receives the second luchot. So God, in the story of forgiveness of Chet HaEgel, of the sin of the golden calf, there is a whole story told twice even of how Moshe implores God to forgive the people and reasons with God and gives God good reasons to forgive the people. And the reason is both what will people say and also, but look, you promised. This is your people. You don't have another people. This is the people to whom you promised that you would be their God. And Moshe reminds God of God's essence, of the essence of God's relationship with Israel. And in that context, it also makes a lot of sense for God to be exposing. Moshe asks God, I want to see you, right? And God says, you can't see me, but this is who I am. And then God says, God passes by Moshe. It actually isn't clear exactly who is Vayikra, who calls out, but we could understand that it's God cries out, God, I am God, I am El Rachum V'Chanun, right? And like Rabbi Glinken said, this is what you need to say when you want me to forgive you. This is who I am. This is my essence. And we get a feeling of a very deep closeness that is created within this big disaster, this big tear of the relationship. There is a closeness that's being built, an intimacy, a renewed acknowledgement of who God is and of what the relationship is about, and a decision that despite everything that's happened, God will continue with the people of Israel. And in fact, the people of Israel, some of them are punished, right? Moshe comes down and God says, and Moshe tells the Levites to kill their brethren, and 3,000 people are killed in that instance. And Moshe grinds up the golden calf and mixes it with water and lets the people of Israel drink it, and possibly some people die from that, from heavy metal poisoning. That's plausible, but God does not destroy the people like God said, right? And they continue their walk through the desert, and they continue the story. Now, I'm just going to segue here for just a second to the ending of the passage that we read in Slichot. Right, in Slichot, we quote word for word from the story of the golden calf. And then there's another one more verse, and then another quote, this ending that we read is a quote from, I can only find this here, is a quote from, I didn't actually put the reference here. It's from Tehillim, Peivav, Tehillim from Psalms 86. And it says, Ki ata Hashem tov v'salach v'rav chesed lechol korecha, verse 5. And then in verse 15, in the same chapter, it says, Ve'ata Adonai el rachum v'chanun erech apayim v'rav chesed ve'emet. And then the chapter ends with Asei mi'ot tova v'yiru sonai v'yevoshu ki ata Adonai azartani v'nichamtani, which also made its way into our liturgy in the plural. Right? Asei imanu ot letova v'yiru soneinu v'yevoshu ki ata Hashem azartanu v'nichamtanu. Sorry, which we also say in the Slichot. And it's interesting to see how, once again, in the same passage, as Rabbi Glinken mentioned, in the same passage, we don't quote again Hashem Hashem el rachum v'chanun, but we have another reference to another place where not all 13 attributes are mentioned, but some of them, and it's clearly referring to the same, clearly supposed to be reminding us of the same passage and of the same essence. Now, when we go to the other story in Bamidbar, the story of the Meraglim, we see a very, very different, I think, model of the interaction and of asking for forgiveness and of receiving forgiveness. So let's remember the story for a second. The Meraglim go to Eretz Yisrael, they come back, they give an unfavorable report, all but two. And God gets very, very, the people get scared. They say that we don't want to go into the land of Israel. And then God gets so angry and he says, how long will they stop? Will they question me? Will they spurn me? How long will they have no faith in me, despite everything I've done for them? I'm going to get rid of them. They're all going to die in the plague. And I'm going to make you, Moshe, a large nation. And then Moshe says to God, no, listen, what is the reason that Moshe gives here? He says, listen, Mitzrayim will hear, when the Egyptians hear this, they're going to say he has no power to bring them, no real power to bring them to the land that he promised, and therefore God is destroying this people. And that's it. God is powerless to bring that people into the land, and that is why God slaughtered them in the wilderness. And that's the only reason that Moshe gives to God. Only what will people say? There's no reminding of the covenant. There's no reminding of the promise. There's no reminding of the essence of the relationship. Only what will people say? And then Moshe says, listen, I'm going to quote what you told me to quote, right? You have told me that if I say this, then then we'll be okay. And then he says, Adonai, erech apayim v'rav chesed, noseh avon v'fesha, v'nakeh lo ינקה, פוקד avon avot al banim, al shilashim v'al ribeim. Moshe says to God almost what God said at Har Sinai, but not exactly. There are a few names or attributes missing here. First of all, Adonai appears only one time. In the Chazalic tradition, in the rabbinic tradition, the name Hashem is the name of Midat HaRachamim, and the name Elohim is the name of Midat HaDin. And Hashem appearing twice here, appearing twice before, and only once here might indicate, if this is an ancient tradition, might indicate slightly less Rachamim. And then he said, Derech apayim v'rav chesed, no ve'emet, noseh avon v'fesha, v'chata'a. Chata'a is missing. Noseh avon v'fesha is the quality that means that God passes on our indiscretions and our transgressions. Right here, this is forgiving iniquity and transgression. Noseh is to pass it on, and here there is less of that. There's less passing on. Here it's only noseh avon v'fesha. In Chet HaEgel it's noseh avon v'fesha v'chata'a. And then v'nakeh lo ינקה, פוקד avon avot al banim v'al shilashim v'al ribeim, without ועושה חסד לאלפים, לאוהביי ולשומרי מצוותיי. Sorry, without, רגע. רגע, I want to quote this correctly. So, no, not quoting it. Okay, where am I? No, that was I'm sorry. That was going back to Aseret HaDibrot, where God says, "Noseh avon v'fesha v'chata'a v'nakeh lo ינקה, פוקד avon avot al banim al shilashim ribeim, עושה חסד לאלפים, לאוהביי ולשומרי מצוותיי." No, I'm sorry. Slicha. It is here. Hashem, El Rachum v'Chanun, erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet. Here. נוצר חסד לאלפים, נושא עוון ופשע וחטאה, ונקה לא ינקה. Here's נוצר, I knew we had נוצר חסד somewhere. נוצר חסד לאלפים, which is missing in במדבר, okay? נוצר חסד לאלפים, saving, cherishing merit and passing on the transgressions. All of that is missing from Bamidbar. Bamidbar's God, or at least the God that Moshe quotes or turns to, is much more rigid, is much more stringent, is less merciful, is less carrying on the transgressions, and less forgiving. And indeed, in Moshe finally says, "Slach na la'avon ha'am hazeh kigodel chasdecha," right? Please forgive this people, because you are so you in your great kindness, and don't erase them. And God says, "Okay, vayomer Hashem, salachti kidvarecha," and that's what came into our liturgy. These verses, right? Slachna, please forgive. Because we need the terms of forgiveness to be in our, we want to quote the terms of forgiveness. So we're quoting how Moshe asked for forgiveness. We're quoting how God says, yes, I forgive you. And this is what we want from the high holidays. But in the story, that's not what happens. The next verse is, Ve'ulam chayani, v'malech v'od Hashem et kol haaretz. But, God says, yes, I'll forgive you, but I'm still going to kill all of them. None of them is going to enter the land of Israel. They're all going to die in the desert. It's not like in Chet HaEgel, where some of them died, but most of them continued. in this story, God says that God forgives, but God does not actually absolve, or God still carries out the punishment. In the end, they all die, except for Kalev and Yoshua bin Nun. Even Moshe and Aaron die. Everyone who is in that situation will not enter the land of Israel. And this is a major difference. We have these two stories that are sort of intertwined in our Seder Slichot that we say these days and on Yom Kippur. The rabbis strung together these verses in a way that kind of makes us feel like, oh yes, these are the times that God forgave us. These are the times that we asked for forgiveness and God forgave us. When in fact, these are two very different stories. One is a story in which there was discourse. There was a reminder of the relationship. There was a reminder of the closeness. There was a renewed closeness. There was a renewed covenant. After God says that God forgives, Moshe goes up again and reenacts. Everyone reenacts. Moshe reenacts. The people reenact. The people could have transgressed again, but they didn't. And that's the whole point of forgiveness and of asking and of receiving forgiveness, is we get to the same situation and we act differently. And all of that happened in the story of Chet HaEgel. And with a merciful God, and with a God that actually really is prepared to move on. While in Chet HaMeraglim, God is not so merciful. God is not reminded of the relationship. There is no real correction of the situation. And God doesn't really actually forgive. God says that God forgives, but the punishment still comes. And I think this is to say that we have to accept, as we enter these days, we have to accept that forgiveness, asking for forgiveness and receiving forgiveness, is going to look many different ways in many different situations. It's not going to be Chet HaEgel every time. It's not going to be possible to sit down with the person and hack it out and really be reminded of our closeness and renew our relationship and really continue kind of picking up where we left off. Sometimes it's going to have to be rough around the edges. Sometimes it's going to have to be just with words, and it's going to take a long, long time, maybe even several years, until we can rebuild the relationship and continue to go forward. And sometimes it's going to require a price, and sometimes the relationship will never be the same as it was before. And we have to let go of this, of an idyllic perception of forgiveness, because if we only strive for that, we'll be afraid to try to achieve forgiveness in those difficult situations where we pretty much know that we're not going to get forgiveness. And so we have to tie together different kinds of forgiveness. We have to tie together the more idyllic type, and we have to tie together the less idyllic type, the more the more painful type, together into our services, to remind us that we have to adjust our expectations and be realistic about what we can expect, and in order to not give up on the difficult work of asking for forgiveness and giving forgiveness and being able to receive forgiveness. There's a beautiful midrash in Dvarim Rabbah, which adds another level of intertwining these two stories, and also of Moshe's role in asking for forgiveness. The midrash, I couldn't find a translation in English, but I'll translate simultaneously. So שני דברים גזר הקדוש ברוך הוא, אחד על ישראל ואחד על משה. God decreed something regarding Israel and something regarding Moshe, right? He decreed that Israel would be destroyed, and he decreed that Moshe would not go into Eretz Israel. Now, this is tying the stories together. אחד על ישראל בשעה שעשו אותו מעשה, did that transgression. This is what God, in the retelling of the story in Dvarim, God says to Moshe, let go of me and let me destroy them. In the retelling of the story of the golden calf. Moshe, when he asked to go into Eretz Israel, God said to him, you will not go through this, you will not pass over this river Jordan. And Moshe asked God to cancel both of them, right? In one instance, Moshe said to God, Slach na la'avon ha'am hazeh ki godel chasdecha. Where is that from? That's from the Meraglim. That's not from the golden calf. The Midrash ties these stories together. Okay, the punishment from the golden calf with the request for forgiveness from the story of the Meraglim. So Moshe asks, Slach na la'avon ha'am hazeh, and God accepted and canceled the punishment. It doesn't say cancel the punishment. It says Batlasha Kadosh Baruch Hu. God canceled the anger. V'nitkayma shel Moshe. Okay, God was canceled, and Moshe got what he wanted. Shene'emar salachti kidvarecha. God forgave. I forgave just like you asked me to. And then when Moshe came to Eretz Israel, he started saying, listen, God, maybe I can go over the Jordan and I'll see the good country. And God says to him, Moshe, כבר ביטלת את שלי וקיימתי את שלך. I already canceled my decree and I accepted your request. I said I'm going to destroy them and you said forgive them and I accepted. Now, do you want me, now if you want, now I want to do what I decreed and cancel what you're requesting for yourself. God said, Moshe, you can't hold the rope from both ends. If you want to cancel my decree for destroying the people of Israel, then you have to cancel your request for saving them. If you want to accept my decree if you want to cancel my decree for of you not going into the land of Israel, you have to accept my decree to destroy the people of Israel. And if you want to cancel my decree, you have to cancel your request. And then Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Moshe heard that, and he says, Ribono shel olam, Yamut Moshe u'me'a kayotze bo. 100 people like Moshe should die, or I should die 100 times over. And the people of Israel should stay safe. I'm not going to ask you to save me at the expense of the people of Israel. And here we see how these stories are intertwined, because the story very freely quotes from both requests of Moshe from God to forgive, when actually they're different stories. I'll just one last sentence to finish. If we're already talking about Moshe, another passage from Slinghold is just interesting. If we brought two models of forgiveness that come together in the centerpiece of Slinghold to show us how complicated forgiveness is and how we need to adjust our expectations. But we also slip in someone over the years slipped in this extra verse into the verses of Slinghold that asks God, Al na tashet aleinu chatat asher no'alnu v'asher chatanu. Please don't put on us the responsibility of everything bad that we have done. And this verse is in fact taken from Bamidbar Yud Bet, Bamidbar chapter 12. In fact, is not said to God. It's said to Moshe by his siblings, Miriam and Aaron, after having spoken ill of him and his wife, and they ask for his forgiveness. And they say to him, please don't hold us accountable for all the bad that we have done to you. And so we see here how most, possibly even all of the verses that we recite in the High Holiday Liturgy that have to do with asking for forgiveness are quoted from the context of asking God for forgiveness by various people. And here we see how ben adam lechavero, how relationships between people have slipped into the high holiday liturgy, they pretend to be asking God for forgiveness, because obviously in this context, we're asking God to not hold us responsible, but actually we're quoting a beautiful story of siblings who've wronged their brother and are asking for his forgiveness.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Chaya. And all we
Thank you,
can
Rabbi
say
Chaya.
now is Lo Yehi, may we all know how to forgive and be forgiving in the way that you mentioned.
No. We lost you. You
Oh,
went on.
sorry, can you
There
hear
we
me
go.
now?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to share, if you haven't seen at the beginning, that we have more learning opportunities at Schechter, and you can look at our autumn classes in the link that we just put in the chat. And now, I don't want to take any more time of Rabbi Ari Chassid, who is actually the newest member who joined our Schechter team. Welcome, Ari.
Thank you, Michal. It's an honor, and I'm not sure if I would say that it is humbling, or maybe perhaps it's uplifting to be able to teach tonight with my teachers, with Rabbi Golinkin, who was my teacher for my 5 years in the Mishlei program and the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary, to Rabbi Chaya, who was my professional mentor was my professional mentor, as well as the rabbi at our wedding, and Professor Lederman. That is just such a pleasure always to see you and to learn from you, and that we should also see each other at many smachot. And so many familiar names and new faces and names that are here with us today. So it's really very exciting. I want to take a moment to dedicate this learning to the memory of my first cousin twice removed, Ruth Karp, who left this world 6 years ago on the 23rd of Elul. And here in Israel, we have, over the course of this evening, it has gone from that Ben Hashmashot, that twilight time, to being fully into this new Hebrew date. I think it was a real pleasure to have a woman who was my first cousin twice removed, that at a young age I learned what that relationship was. And she really was like an aunt to us. She never married or had children, and we had the pleasure of celebrating all of our Jewish holidays with her. And what was so amazing and touching was 7.5 years ago, I saw her at my sister's wedding, and she, before even saying hello, she walks right up to me and she said, "Ari, when are you going to become a rabbi?" And I said, "I'm due to be ordained in September of 2016. She said, "Okay, thank you, because you're going to be the rabbi at my funeral." And she passed away days after my ordination. And if that wasn't an indication of the human spirit and will, and that there is something greater than all of us that we don't quite understand, that I don't quite know what is. And of course, I did have the honor to lead her to her last resting place. So I dedicate this learning tonight in memory of my cousin Ruth, who taught me the love of drama, which is really going to play out in this Aleinu prayer. So when I think of Aleinu, I usually think actually of something very special and strange, which is we have this amazing crowd at the synagogue that I've been leading for the 6 years that I'm in the process of becoming a Jew in the pew at in the coming weeks, which is that we have a number of children and teenagers between the ages of 10 and 17 whose parents are not members of the shul, who come every single week to Kabbalat Shabbat to pray with us. And what's really amazing is what will happen is the 11-year-olds in the group will come and sit in services. They'll sit next to their counselors from Noam, who are typically 16 or 17 years old, and they'll sit quietly and they'll follow along, and they start learning Kabbalat Shabbat as their high school counselors, many of whom are also there on their own without their families, will pray with us, and they'll try to learn. And then we start the Aleinu prayer near the end, and something very strange happens, which we start with, Shehu noteh shamayim v'yoser haaretz, u'moshav yikaro b'shamayim mima'al, u'shchinatu zo. And as we're singing, they will stand next to each other, about 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 teenagers and elementary school children, and they will prepare what they're going to do. They go, and they alternate who goes up and who goes down and who goes up and who goes down. And they continue with this, and then they get to the next part. Ba 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 shamayim mima'al v'alaretz v'alaretz, and they go back and forth and they sway. And then we start with Al Ken Nekav Lecha, and they have an entire dance to this that they do. When I was in USY and in Camp Ramah a few decades ago, we would do a box step dance for this. I'm not going to demonstrate it for you because I don't have my camera set up for it. But we would do this box step to the second half of Aleinu. And now I see that these kids and their counselors will get up and they have these very elaborate kicks. Maybe Rabbi Chaya has seen your daughters doing this. Just last week, we hosted your daughter at my shul and she did it together with the campers from Noam. And they have these elaborate kicks that they will do. And it's absolutely amazing that in the deepest theological statement of Aleinu L'Shabeach and our relationship to God, these kids are having the time of their lives dancing. But when I think of Aleinu, I don't only think of that tune. I also think of another one. And I want to share it with us right now. I'm going to see, this is not exactly what I want. I'm going to get there. And here we are, I believe, with Cantor Ozzy Schwartz from Park Avenue.
Ari, we can't hear. Did you share with sound?
Thank you. I need to do advanced sharing. Nope. Do you have, Michal, the advanced sharing that I was going to share with sound? No? Michal, do you have that? Or Josh, does one of you have the
Can you press?
options that we share with
Yeah.
sound?
Yeah. Do you want to send me the link?
Sure. I will send you the link, and we are going to start at 1:30, and thank you for telling me.
Okay.
I will share it with everybody because I think that might be easier. I'm going to stop the share for a second. Yeah. And Rabbi Ornstein, there hasn't been a handout yet, but I will share it shortly. So Michal, if you don't mind putting this up at around 1:30, and I'll let you do the sharing, and I will mute myself.
Okay.
Michal, yeah, you're great. Thank you.
לפני מלך,
So that version of Aleinu, which we heard then, is I would say, a different kind of Aleinu, right? And I can really remember the one year that I spent as a Torah reader in Stockholm, where as we're about to do Aleinu, and suddenly out of nowhere, I hear the organ that goes, bum, bum, bum. And then suddenly the cantor there, Aleinu. And it's a completely different kind of experience than that of seeing my high school and elementary school congregants singing and dancing and clapping and tapping their feet together. And it leads me to ask the big question, which is, what is, if I may ask, what is the real Aleinu L'Shabeach? Is the real Aleinu L'Shabeach a prayer that we are supposed to have fun with and dance with? And, I really understand why at camp or in youth group, The services have been going on for a long time. The kids aren't sure what's coming next. They're ready for whatever food they're going to eat. Or is Aleinu supposed to be a moment of fear and awe? And I don't think that I ever really comprehended a relationship that a human being can have with a sovereign, even when I announced that this was going to be the topic of my class. Because what was it that happened just, what time is it now? Today we're on Sunday, 10 days ago, that completely changed my understanding of how the world relates to a king or queen? Was the passing of Queen Elizabeth. And I think that this Aleinu, with this very deep minor key where we're actually getting down on the ground, maybe our faces are literally touching the floors of wherever we're praying in Musaf and Rosh Hashanah, that this Aleinu is actually in some ways a different prayer. So I want to think about together with you, and I'm going to share right now a little source sheet as well as sharing it on the screen, is how did this Aleinu come to us? So I'm just going to share. It's a very short PDF, right? And we want to think together about what is this moment. So let's first think about the words that we say. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol latet gdula liotzer b'reishit. Right? It is upon us to praise the master of everything. Latet gdula liotzer b'reishit. To give greatness to the creator of the beginnings. And I think in that one sentence, we're actually connecting to Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is, first and foremost, the birthday of the world.
Aryeh, excuse me, can you share it on the screen?
Sure, I haven't done so yet. I'm still in my intro. But yes, I will share it on the screen. Right, that the Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world. And so as we say Aleinu, we are immediately bringing in this idea of God as the creator of the world. Latet gdula liotzer b'reishit. And that, I believe, is the reason why we say Aleinu during Rosh Hashanah. Except what's interesting is that it's not that we say this prayer that many of us might be familiar with from the end of our services 3 times a day on Rosh Hashanah, but rather somehow this prayer that opens the Malchuyot of Rosh Hashanah has made its way into our everyday liturgy. In fact, when we think about the history of this prayer, and this is not in the sheet, but we think about the history of this prayer, there is an Agadah, there is a legend that says that Joshua created this prayer upon conquering the land of Israel. And that this prayer actually goes back for some 3,400 years. Of course, we cannot academically prove that to be true or not, but that legend does exist. But we also have a sense that perhaps this is nevertheless a very, very old prayer, that it is older than the prayers in the oldest Sidurim that we have, going back, say, 12 or 1,300 years at oldest. And one of the reasons for that is that the Aleinu prayer is actually made up of different verses, and there is a hypothesis that during the Second Temple times, that the Levites would sing new prayers that were based around verses. And we know that there are verses at the end of Aleinu because it says, Kakatuv b'toratecha, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Another one for those of us who perhaps grew up, I think most of us are from English-speaking places. I grew up in a public school where every year for choir around Christmas, which of course was also celebrating the birthday of a king, we would sing in my choir the Hallelujah chorus, which has the line in English, and he shall reign forever and ever and ever, which is Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Hakatuv b'toratecha, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. This is a central idea that we sing. And so the scholars say that in fact the Kohanim and the Levi'im, as the Kohanim were doing their service with sacrifices, the Levi'im were taking these verses from Tanakh. Kakatuv b'toratecha, this one is actually, of course, from the Song of the Sea, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, one of the closing verses when Moses and Miriam lead the people in song after crossing the Red Sea. And we continue, and it will be said on that day, and our God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, will be king over the entire world. Yeah, and he will have but one name. And Aleinu came in through this. So why is it? What does this have to do with Rosh Hashanah? And the big question is, what is Rosh Hashanah really about? So we know that one of the traditions about Rosh Hashanah is that it is about the creation of the world. And this appears in a sugya in the Gemara in which we ask, was the world created on Rosh Hashanah, or was the first human created on Rosh Hashanah? But either way, we're celebrating either the beginning or the sort of next major step of creation on Rosh Hashanah. And we also have the verses that are in the Torah itself. And I want to show you two of them. The first one being from the book of Leviticus in 23, from the parasha of Emor, where they describe the different holidays and the work that the Kohanim do. Daber al bnei Yisrael emor b'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad l'chodesh yeh lechem Shabbaton zichron tru'ah mikra kodesh. Speak to the Israelite people thus, I'm taking my translation from Safaria. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe complete rest. Be'echad l'chodesh yeh lechem Shabbaton. Complete rest. Zichron tru'ah mikra kodesh, a sacred occasion commemorated with loud blasts. So in fact, what we have here is we have the date of the 1st of Tishrei with no indication whatsoever that it is Rosh Hashanah. And that even makes sense because it does seem to be a rather silly conclusion that the new year begins on the 7th month. In fact, it's kind of a strange way to look about it, but the Tanakh is unequivocal that the beginning of the year is the 1st of Nisan, and it is only later in the Mishnah and the Masechet Rosh Hashanah and the tractate dealing with Rosh Hashanah that we learn that there are 4 different new years, and that Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah for the kings, and Tishrei is for the world. And that's also interesting that there is a Rosh Hashanah for the flesh and blood kings, and there is a different Rosh Hashanah for the king of the kings of kings, Melech Malchei Malchim. In Bamidbar, we have Uviyom Simchatchem U'Modeichem Roshei Chodshechem, Utkatem b'chatzotzrot al olotechem va'al zivchei shalmechem v'ayu lechem lezikaron lifnei Elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem. And on your joyous occasions, your fixed festivals and new moon days, you shall sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being. They shall be a reminder of you before your God. I, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, am your God. So what we have here is a connection between these two verses that both of them talk about Tkiot and Truot, and both of them talk about Zikaron. In the first one, we have a specific claim that on the first day of the 7th month, it will be a Zikaron Tru'ah, a remembrance of the loud blasts. And in the second verse, we have actually a connection between Zikaron and of Tkiot, even though actually here it says specifically Chatzotzrot, trumpets, and not Shofarot. But we see that there is this connection between memory and shofar, and that both of those things are brought into the first day of the 7th month, what we today call Rosh Hashanah. And if we think about the Musaf service, those two themes of memory and of shofar blasting are very, very present in Musaf, because we have the Zichronot and we have the Shofarot, which are 2 of the 3 major sections of the Musaf service on Rosh Hashanah. But of course, the third one, which is in fact the first one in order, is missing, and it cannot be found anywhere in the Torah. There is no connection in the Torah whatsoever about Rosh Hashanah being about kings, and yet the first section of these 3 where we blow shofar during Musaf is called the Malchuyot. And we even have a question about it. And we know that this is a very, very old tradition to say these prayers because it appears in the Mishnah. So this tradition will be, if it is now 2022, this tradition should be at least 1,822 years old. And if we believe those scholars who say that the Mishnah is a faithful retelling of the Tanaim and not an invention of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, of Rabbi Judah the Prince, then we'll understand that this would be maybe perhaps even from the 3rd generation of Tanaim. And very specifically, we know that Rabbi Akiva was killed during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And so we're saying that this is almost 2,100 years old, or perhaps even more. Seder brachot omer avot ugvurot uktushat Hashem. all of this could look familiar to us. The beginning of the Amidah, we start with Avot, Eloheinu, Elohei Avoteinu. We go on to Gvurot, to Mechayei Hametim, Gdushat Hashem, HaMelech HaKadosh. And already in the fact that the bracha is different, the blessing is different during the 10 days of repentance, including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we know that we're repeating this notion of God as king. The Kolel Malchuyot Imahen Ve'enot Tokea. This is going to be an opinion that is not accepted. Dushat Hayom, the sanctification of the day, and we do blast the shofar, Zichronot, the memory, and we blast the day. Shofarot V'Tokea. Again, we blast the shofar. V'Omer Avodah and Hoda'ah, all parts of every Amidah service, whether during the year or during Shabbat or Chagim. Uvekat Kohanim, Divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Nori. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nori, again, was a member of the Mishnaic period of the Tanaitic period, who was a study partner and sometimes opponent of Rabbi Akiva. Amarlo Rabbi Akiva responds to him, Im einot tokea lamalchuyot lama hu maskir. Why would we do this? Why would we even say it if we don't blow the shofar then? Elo Omer, and he gives a different order of how we do it, and says that we do malchuyot with Kedushat Hayom and we tokea. I brought this today, and you can see it here in English as well, and I sent it along the Zoom in the chat, to point out that this kingship and the blessing of kingship is very, very old. And Aleinu is the opening prayer of it. In order to understand why we do this, we have to think about what the words are. And I return again to the fact that the opening word of Aleinu, the opening sentence, puts this idea that God is the creator of the universe. And there already we have a very strong notion of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the creation of the world, that it's not enough to remember the creation of the world. We have to remember the place of the creator. We have to have this very special moment to say that God as creator should be recognized. That did not make us like the people of the world, did not put us here like the families of this land. Our portion is not with theirs, our fate is not like theirs. And there is some questions about how old this line is and whether or not it belongs. Of course, in the Ashkenazi tradition, this line is gone, largely assumed because of self-censorship to prevent Christian critics from burning our Sidurim. But they pray to emptiness and to a God who will not save them. And we bow our knees and prostrate before Melech Malchei Hamlachim, the King of the Kings of Kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then we go back to Bereshit, we go back to the creation of the world. Shehu notesh shamayim v'yosed aretz. Moshav yikaro b'shamayim mima'al. And it's this entire description of how amazing it is to create the world. And what is the comparison here? The comparison is that some people will worship part of the world that was created. People will worship and think inappropriately that a rock or a tree, or dare I say, perhaps the author of a later text, a human being, is a god. And they're saying, no, there is the King of the Kings of Kings. No matter how much a human being can imagine a sovereign over all of this world, remember that that which created the world is above them. And on Rosh Hashanah, as we are celebrating the world that has been created, we must remember that that world was created by something and somebody, and that something or somebody is not something that we acknowledge here in this world, right? We think of this famous midrash of Avraham, who, of course, smashes all of his father's idols but one, and leaves the staff in the final idol's hands and says he did it. And, excuse me, this is the challenge of teaching at a time when our children are going to bed in Israel. That Abraham is saying something cannot create everything if you created him. This is what Abraham says to his dad. Or he says to the woman who walks in to buy an idol, noticing that she is a little bit older than Abraham himself. So if Abraham is around 70 when he gets out of there, perhaps this woman is 71 or 72. And he asks her how old she is and says, why would you worship something that was created yesterday? How silly could you be? You're so much older. That could not have created the world. And if we look around in this world, Aleinu L'Shabeach says, and we understand that it is so much more powerful than that which we know, then we must know that there is something that is beyond everything that we recognize. So Aleinu is a call on Rosh Hashanah to say, don't think that you know everything. Don't think that it is possible that you can explain everything on this earth, because everything that you see around you is going to have something that is more complicated. And so it's why it's not, God is not only Malchei Hamlachim, it's not Melech Hamlachim. God is not the King of Kings. God is Melech Malchei Hamlachim, the King of the Kings of Kings, because we can maybe imagine a world like the United Kingdom, in which there is today a king, and there are princes, and there are princesses, and there are dukes, and there are earls, and there are, I apologize if I'm getting my royalties mixed up, there are baronesses and duchesses and all those different kinds of things. As a good American, I don't know royalty too well. But even if you can constantly think of something that is above that, there is still Melech Malchei Hamlachim. And that is what we need to worship. And it continues, we actually continue to say, even though we were not put like all these other people, we do not believe that this should forever be our fate alone, but instead we want to see a world in which all of us recognize God's kingship. And Rabbi Nachman has a beautiful teaching about this, in which he says the purpose of Aleinu and Rosh Hashanah is that we recognize that every single human being was created b'tzelem Elohim. Because if there are kings in this world, and kings of kings in this world, then some people are more important than others. Rabbi Nachman says that our moment here is to recognize that even if there are kings like that, we all have the piece of Melech Malchei Hamlachim. We all have the piece of the King of the Kings of Kings. And so we are, in fact, just as important, even if we do not have a throne, and even if we do not have a castle. And so we say this every year on Rosh Hashanah as a moment to remember that there is something so great in the creation of the world. And as there is something so great, there is always going to be potential for ourselves and for the world that we live in. And so, in fact, in Rosh Hashanah, and my teacher, Rabbi Chaya, just talked about forgiveness. And one of the hardest parts about forgiveness is it causes us to recognize that we've been hurt and that we have hurt others. And so Malchuyot is actually here to say that we are all every day walking potentials. Vaya Adonai lemelcha kol haaretz b'emo hu yeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad. That in every moment that every single person should see that God is among us, that God rules over all, and that our potential on this day and in this coming year is infinite. Shana Tova.
Toda rabba, Rav Aryeh. Meragesh, toda.
Thank you very much. And like Chaya said, let it be. And thank you so much. We're moving on to Shulamit Lederman, who always surprises us with such interesting and exciting arts shown. Shulamit, please. Shulamit, are you with us?
Still can't hear you, Shulamit.
Yeah, okay. I'm speaking tonight about interaction and interchange between Judaism and Christianity as expressed in art in the story of the binding of Isaac, sacrifice of Isaac. I'm taking you first to Dura Europus on a trip to the border between Syria and Iraq. And this is where the Euphrates There is the river of the Euphrates, and we know that a wonderful thing happened there that was found in 1929. We had, there was a discovery of a synagogue fully decorated. All its walls were filled with pictures. It was discovered by chance when a bomb fell on a hill, and the hole, when the soldiers came close to the hole, they saw pictures. And then different groups came to investigate. And this is really the greatest discovery in Jewish art, because it shows that in the 3rd century, this synagogue was built between 245, destroyed in 256, meaning in the 3rd century, before we have pictures in churches, because pictures in churches start only in the 4th and 5th century, and here we are in the 3rd century. So what you see here is some of the walls. There's this wall remained because they had to put sand between the wall of the city and to protect the city, and they filled all the structure near the wall with sand, and that kept this on its, as walls, which were discovered in the last century. Now, what we are going to see here, and I'm trying to get this one out of the way. Okay, what we're going to see here is the story of the binding of the Akedah, binding of Isaac, as was visualized in a very concise and symbolic way, starting in this synagogue. In the synagogue, you can see that the wall that is the west wall, meaning facing Jerusalem, because we're in the north of Syria, northeast. And so we are in the west here, facing Jerusalem. And in this main alcove right here, the picture above is the picture of the binding of Isaac, which you can see here. This is this area where this was a Beit Knesset, meaning a gathering place. And when they wanted to pray, they would bring the books or the scrolls into this alcove. And above that was this story that you see here. And the story has meaning a symbol of the temple. There's the menorah and the 4 species. And on the side, we have a story that shows Abraham with his back to us. This is the early stages of the synagogue. We see Isaac on this altar, and we see the ram here, right here, the ram. And so we know from Divrei Yamim, from 2nd Chronicle, we see that the verse says, then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David, his father, meaning this is the Har Moriah. So we know that it's definitely the temple, because this is where Abraham brings Isaac. Now, these are the foundation which Solomon laid for the building of the temple. So we have the story here, and let's see how the story appears in Christianity, because in Christianity, the binding of Isaac is a prefiguration of the sacrifice of Jesus. And here we have a sarcophagus of that was called Junius Bassus. It's a 4th century sarcophagus of a Roman pagan who became a Christian. And he had all this carving done to show how the Old Testament parallels stories of the New Testament. So here we have the story of the binding of Isaac, and we'll see it from close because it shows a very important point, that where we treat the ram, the shofar, they have the Agnus Dei. And what does that mean? Right here you could see here is what we saw in the synagogue, and here is what we see in the sarcophagus. And you could see there is Isaac on the altar, and here is Isaac bowing down in a Christian form of praying to God. And across from him we have the ram here with the shofar, and we have the Agnus Dei, which according to the book of John, it says that there is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, meaning the Agnus Dei was the thing that really Jesus brought in his sacrifice. Now, if we look at other interesting things, we have here Salerno ivories. It's from the 12th century, and there are many ivories that tell the stories of the Old Testament and also of New Testament. And again, we can see Abraham, Isaac, and the Agnus Dei, which God tells him to take instead. But in Christianity, it's the sacrifice of Isaac that is parallel to the Lamb of God. We come back to Judaism. Here we are in Bet Alpha. Bet Alpha is a synagogue that was discovered in the north of Israel. And when they were doing some agricultural work, the tractor went on top of some land and discovered this beautiful mosaic floor. There was one like that also discovered in the 4th century in Hamat Tveria, and this is from the 6th century. You have here, the floor has 3 parts, and the part closest to the entry to the synagogue is the story of the binding of Isaac. Here is the story. You could see we are in the 6th century. This is a Byzantine art format, meaning it's very stylized. It looks like children drawing, but the important thing is to relate the message. Here we have even writing that explain this is Abraham, this is Isaac, which he is about to put on the altar, and here is the Ayil, the ram, and the hand of God that says don't send your hand onto this boy. And here are the 2 boys, the 2 helpers with the donkey. So we have a story that tells us in the incident, the exact story, when we read it actually from left to right, where in Judaism and Hebrew, we read from right to left. But it's not the real order, because here, if we read it according to the way the story unfolds, here are the 2 boys that he tells them to wait aside, and then he takes Isaac to put him on the altar, and then we have the ram, which should be here according to the order of the story. Now, at the same time that this Bet Alpha synagogue was designed, we have a church in San Vitale. The Bet Alpha is 6th century, and this is 6th century. It's the same idea. Here we have the sacrifice. Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, and we have the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. We have also the story of the angels coming to tell Abraham and Sarah about the birth of Isaac. But this is part of the story, and it's a different story, where in the story of the Bet Alpha, we see something very definitely not wanting to give us depth or any kind of feeling of depth. We just to tell us the story, whereas here we have the clouds, we have trees, we have a feeling of death, meaning it's a different idea in relating the story to the people who come to pray. And if we look again at the synagogue and we see what we see here is we see the ram, and we see something very interesting. The artist knows to make an animal with 2 horns. You see, here is an animal with 2 horns right here, whereas here we have only 1 horn, meaning that they want to point out the shofar, not the horns of the ram, but the shofar, because the shofar is the important thing. Like in Rosh Hashanah, it says, said Rabbi Abahu, why is the ram's horn blown as a shofar? Said the Holy One, blessed be he, sound the round of the ram's horn as a shofar before me, so that I will remember the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, the son of Abraham, for your sake. And I will consider it for you as if you had bound yourself before me. Meaning it's a very important point to make here the ram appear with only one horn to point to the shofar right here. Now, interestingly, we also have manuscripts from the Middle Ages, and here is a beautiful manuscript that you see right here, and it's a prayer for Rosh Hashanah, and it points out the different things that were spoken about before, that the Babylonian Talmud says on Rosh Hashanah 16a, Rabbi Yehuda said, in the name of Rabbi Akiva, the Holy One, blessed be he, said, and you should recite before me on Rosh Hashanah, Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot. Malchuyot, here you see the crown, Malchuyot and Shofarot. Malchuyot, kingdom, to show that you anoint, accepted me as the king over you, and Zichronot, memory, so you remember the history and the memory. You want me to remember the sacrifice that Abraham almost sacrificed, but didn't. Only we have the horn to tell us the story right here. Now, Isaac in the story carrying the wood on his shoulders. And that's very interesting because we see that in Christianity. In Christianity, Isaac is really the prefiguration of Jesus, and he's carrying like the wood of the cross on his shoulders. And the story tells us that, and we see that in a manuscript called Christian Topography from the 9th century. And it says here, Isaac, who on his own shoulders carried the wood for his own sacrifice, as also the Lord Christ carried his own cross on his shoulders, who died in intention and it was given his life by God. He, in exchange for whom a ram was slain, and whose father heard these words from God, because thou hast not spared the son whom thou lovest, so in like manner it has been said that in reference that to Christ, that he did sacrifice his life. Now, when we compare this Christian story, picture of the story, to a Haggadah, and this is a Jewish Haggadah from the 13th century, and we see here the Abraham and the donkey. Here we see Abraham and Isaac on the donkey, and the two boys here. But the story is that it tells us that Abraham said unto the young men, Isaac wants to know, here is the wood, here is the fire, where is the sacrifice? And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together, even though he had told his son that God will provide the sacrifice. He agrees to be together with his father, going on to the sacrifice. And here we have a Sarajevo Haggadah, where is a Haggadah from the 14th century from Spain. And we see Abraham carrying the fire and the knife, and Isaac before him carrying the wood. It's very interesting. More interesting is to see that the Medrash in Genesis Rabbah, it says, and Abraham took the wood and laid it upon Isaac his son. This is a Jewish Medrash for the offering, as if he was carrying his own cross on his shoulder. This is in the Midrash. And he took the fire and the knife. So we can see that there is an influence. We talk about the fact that Isaac is willing to be sacrificed and he's willing to take the wood. And there is some kind of influence of what the Christians are saying about Jesus and carrying his own wood, the wood for his sacrifice. And they walked on together, one to offer sacrifice and one to be sacrificed, one to slaughter and one to be slaughtered. So it's a very interesting thing to witness something like that in Jewish sources. And you could see how similar the picture is. This picture from the 9th century, a Christian picture, and the Jewish picture here in the Sarajevo Haggadah. Something very amazing. And then we have the Bible Moralisé, which is a manuscript, a Christian manuscript from France. And in here, there is a Moralisé, meaning they have sets of 2 pictures. One tells the story in the Old Testament, and one, the way you interpreted the story in the New Testament. So here it says there is writing on the side. Here Abraham comes to the mountain, and before him his son, who carries the wood to make the sacrifice, Genesis 22:6. And here the interpretation that Isaac carried the wood for the sacrifice signified Jesus Christ, who carried his cross to his crucifixion. So you could see how this is a prefiguration, the story in the Old Testament to the story in the New Testament. And then we also have Abraham comes and he's about to sacrifice his son, Isaac, and the angel says to him, leave your son and take this lamb, which is in the fire, in the thorn, and sacrifice him. And the parallel New Testament understanding is that the angel said to Abraham, take this lamb, which is in this fire of thorns, signifies the Father of heaven, who said Jesus Christ, who is the true lamb, who is among the thorns of the fire of the world, and he will be sacrificed. So you could see how much there is parallel ideas, and the Akedah, beside what we saw, symbol we saw, the Akedah is also gives us the notion of martyrdom. We see that in this amazing Haggadah, the bird head Haggadah. The mentioning of the covenant with Abraham and Isaac is translated visually to the scene of the sacrifice of Isaac. And we see here, you see, this is the Haggadah. The bird's head is a Haggadah that has characters, images that have bird's head. And we see here that God remembers the cry of the people, and he remembers his promise and his covenant with Abraham. So we see, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant. And then we look at the pictures. This is this character image that I showed you, the bird's head. We see the story. Here he's about to kill Isaac, who is lying down here, crouching down. There is the ram and the angel that stops him. Now, interestingly, Abraham stands holding a big sword in one hand, with the other grabbing the hair of the bird's head child, who is crouching on the altar, looking like an animal ready to be slaughtered. And we have a very wonderful book by Alexander Evan Chen, who published a book on the binding of Isaac, mystical and philosophical interpretation of the Bible, and brings different kinds of opinions about the Akedah. So he says the Hasidei Ashkenaz, who were the early Hasidim of the 11th, 12th century, felt that they are expected to offer their children a sacrifice and save them from becoming Christian during the Crusades. And we can see that the way they describe here the sacrifice, it's really very touching because he looks like an animal. But the thing that is most disturbing is that when reviewing Isaac, what is the interaction with Judaism, the Jewish attitude regarding the loss of thousands who died as martyrs, sacrificed in sanctifying God's name during the Middle Ages, considered the same typology as viewed in Christianity? That's a very big question. They felt in one way that they were willing to sacrifice, but God did not send them a lamb instead. And so you could see here the bird's head. You see, it has the eye and the shape of an animal. But the worst is, what kind of bird has hair and has an ear? And this ear that you see here is the ear of a pig. When you compare the ear, this is the ear of the pig. So meaning that this is a very disturbing kind of imaging that we have in this Haggadah. And if we take the way the story is told in Christianity, they tell it with a lot of feeling. In the Bible, it gives the story in a very matter-of-fact way. It doesn't say the feeling of the people, whereas here they give you the whole entire feeling of Abraham and of Isaac, especially Isaac. And the thing is very interesting, because if we look at this attitude of looking at the story, not just as a trial for Abraham, but you think to yourself of a father willing to take his child for whom he waited for so long and be willing to sacrifice him. So if we check the art of later artists that are not just giving messages of the church or of ideas, Christian ideas, but we take Rembrandt, who was already Protestant, who could put feelings, not just tell what the church has expected him to tell. And so here we have an oil done in 1635, done by Rembrandt, and you could see him, Abraham here, holding the face of the head of Isaac, and he's all transfixed like, and the angel has to really grab his hand and stop him from doing this killing. And Evan Chen, in his book on the Akedah, he presents Abraham Joshua Heschel's idea about the Akedah. Heschel's view of the Akedah treats this biblical story as a divine attempt to provide Abraham with an opportunity to examine his inner soul twice. Once when he was commanded by God to sacrifice his son, and the second when the angel called and told him, lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. Why this repetition? You could see that Abraham is like in a transfix. He's being woken up by the angel, and the angel has to grab his hand and stop him from wanting to continue this terrible act. Now, if we look again at the way the angel is grabbing him and telling him, we compare what we see here, that basically Abraham wants to show his deep faith to God and his desire to fulfill God's request of him fully. He totally disengages from his earthly emotions and emotions and beings, and God, who is deeply involved, but he wants to show his devotion. Yet in 1655, the same Rembrandt makes this picture of the Akedah. This is a lithograph, where the other one was in oil. And look at it here. Abraham is holding his son. He's very compassionately, and the angel is really hugging him in a very gentle way. And what happened in those 20 years between the oil and this picture? A very sad thing. Here, you could see the difference in this attitude of the artist. And the difference is that, let me just go back here. The difference is that in the course of the 20 years, Rembrandt lost 3 children who died. And so his entire attitude, you could see, changed in these 2 paintings. And if we look at another example, you have Abel Pan, who was an artist in Israel, taught in Bezalel. And in 1949, he gives this beautiful picture of old Abraham hugging the child, who he has his knife here, but he's kissing his child, and the child looks dead. He's dead. And the way Abraham is holding him is as a result of a personal story. 1949, a day before the state of Israel was established, Abel Pan lost his eldest son, Eldad, who was killed fighting in the heroic battle in defense of Gush Etzion during the War of Independence. And Abel Pan, who previously painted many paintings of the biblical stories, here he had to show this compassion and the trial and tribulation of this kind of sacrifice. And the last picture is the one of Marc Chagall in Akedat Yitzchak. He did that in 1960, between 1966. And before he died, Chagall stated, quote, "I want to paint paradise. It is easy to do for people those who believe in paradise. For me, it is difficult because I know that hell exists too. That's why my paradise has a lot of blue colors. And what he shows in the blue colors is, you could see the cross and people being tortured here in the history of the Jews that had many akedot, many times that they had to sacrifice the children. So the sacrifice of Isaac appears to be linked to the symbols of Jewish suffering because of its way of connection to Christian understanding of its meaning and the way Jews were treated over the history. So I wish you a Shana Tova.
Wow, Shulamit,
Shulamit, toda. Thank you.
incredible ending for this super interesting
Wow.
evening of learning or day of learning, depends on where you are. I think
Morning
this
of
is,
learning.
yeah. This last picture is very, very powerful. Thank you all for coming and for talking and enriching us with your knowledge. Thank you all who participate. And all we could wish for is everyone have a great Shana Tova. And thank you for joining in each year and each holiday with us.
And just to let you know, we will be putting this out as well in another form come later this week. So please look for it and you'll have these to review. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a
Shana
great
tova,
day.
everyone.
Shana
Shana
Tova.
Tova.
מי המנחים?
היא עובדת שם